How are you, Rich?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm fine. And who are you, Rich Lowry?
I am the editor of National Review magazine. I'm proud of it.
You want to know who I am? I am the Washington correspondent for GQ magazine. And I just want to say to anyone out there in Blogging Heads land, if you hear a loud rumbling sound, that is not a truck going by, nor is it the crumbling of the foundations of conservatism. It is my enormous cat, Moby, who is enjoying the heat from the computer. And of course, the white hot heat generated by the intense excitement around midterms.
Great
which he's feeling coming off of me.
Great segue.
Thank you very much. I was actually at Nicole Wallace's book party last night. As she has a book out. I'm giving her a free plug here. Sort of loosely based on her time as both aide in the McCain campaign and also at the White House in the communications department. It's doing pretty well, from what I understand. And so there was a lot of McCain and Bush alumni at this party. And I'm not going to use the word giddy to describe the feeling, but it was definitely more positive than, say, any gathering you would have seen a year ago or 2 years ago. What are things like at the National Review offices? How's the mood?
Not quite giddy, but there's a excitement and expectation in the air. But I'm always afraid of jinxing things, so I just can't wait for Tuesday to get here. But I literally can't believe it doesn't shock me there's been a snapback, but that it could be on this level is really extraordinary and speaks to just how fluid and what a plastic moment it is in our politics. And one of the mistakes I think liberals made after November 08, they thought, okay, that's it. History has tapped us on the shoulder and selected us, and we're going to rule. And for 40 years, as James Carville put it in a very partisan book. And instead they just had a chance, and they've blown it, and now Republicans will get some version of a chance. It's different than having unified control of Washington, and we'll see whether they blow it or not.
I differ in my take about what the mood was and what happened, I think, in 08 and 09. I don't think that people that progressives actually working in government and Democrats actually working in government were giddy upon, once let's say election night, yeah. that felt pretty good for everybody. But I think come January 09, I think, Obama's inauguration speech, it's had its strongest tone and its strongest message was about how difficult things were going to be coming up. And I remember talking to people in the White House, and maybe they were, euphoric and optimistic for a month or two, but I think they pretty quickly got the picture that things were going to be incredibly difficult for them. So I actually was looking at the article that you and Ramesh were writing, and you were describing this atmosphere of, omnipotence and joy and euphoria of coming into power, and I just my memory of that time does not match up to that. I think that Democrats have known it was going to be a hard slog. Now, that's not to say that you're wrong about what things are going to be like. Come election day, obviously the Republicans are going to pick up the House. I'm not as sure about the Senate. I think things look really tough there. We can talk about that if you want. And I'm not sure what the numbers are going to be at the House. I don't think it's going to be 55 plus, which is what you're hearing from some of the more optimistic Republicans. And I think that maybe this is something we can agree on, which is that I hope for your sake, I can't believe I'm saying that, but I hope for your sake and your side's sake that they don't come in with euphoria and feeling like they have a huge mandate, because while they do have voter sentiment on their side, I think they're going to have a tough time too. I think that politics in general has changed. This isn't just a pendulum swinging. I'm searching for the right metaphor right here, but it's a pendulum swinging, but it's sort of what the pendulum has to swing through is a lot of muck and grime, and it's a pretty hard swing, if that makes any sense at all. And I don't think things are going to be easy for either party come Wednesday.
Now, when you say that the Democrats didn't have a sense of euphoria, or at least Democrats inside government, thought it would be a hard slog, do you mean in terms of the economy or in terms of their political standing with the public?
Well, definitely economy first. I think that was clear from the beginning, and even in 08, the Wednesday after Election Day in 08, I think you could have talked to Austin Goolsbee and he would have told you things are going to be tough. And the president did too. I know for a fact that in talking to his staff, talking about the economy specifically. But I also think the president and I think a lot of other people in the White House and on the Hill were cautiously. I don't know if the word is optimistic. To the extent they were optimistic, I think there was a caution about it in terms of how much voter support they had. I know there's some people like James Carville who, let's face it, is prone to
exaggeration.
Yes, exaggeration. The amplitude of his emotions is pretty great, and I think that he might have talked about 40 years of reign or whatever. But I think that people who were a little more sober knew that they had lucked out in a big way on this election. That the circumstances favored Obama and the media atmosphere favored Obama in such a way that it was unsustainable to think that they were going to have this kind of mandate going forward. And I think to the extent that they thought they had a mandate, that crumbled pretty soon as we got talking about healthcare. The amount of resistance that people had to that, and I think it was a false resistance, and I think it was a resistance based on misinformation, but it was resistance, I think showed pretty clearly that they did not have a progressive mandate going forward. And I think that I show me a liberal in Congress who thinks that now. I mean, who even thought it a year ago?
Yeah. Well, I would say a couple things. One, obviously, it's easy to pick on Carville or any sort of cable TV partisan who's analytical rigor.
Because they're not also in the business of governing, and they're not in the business of governing.
Right.
They are not. Go ahead.
But it wasn't just the Carvilles. I mean, Peter Beinart wrote a cover story for Time magazine, The New Liberal Order.
Right, and I would say he's also not in government.
Sam Tannenhouse, but these are serious analysts and intellectuals who do create the climate. Sam Tannenhouse, of course, rushed to write a book and a cover story for the New Republic about the death of conservatism. And if your sense, and I don't doubt that's what you're hearing from people inside government, they should have governed differently. If they really thought they were just getting an opportunity and it was very tenuous, they sure as hell didn't act like it. And even when they got that huge, to use the famous Thomas Jefferson phrase of fire bell in the night, that losing that Massachusetts Senate election to Scott Brown, they persisted and they couldn't readjust. They didn't want to readjust. So even if they weren't infected by hubris, as I still believe they were, they certainly acted like it. And that's part of the reason weak economy obviously creates context for everything, but it's part of the reason they're going to get such a shellacking in less than a week.
Well, I mean, I guess there's two things I want to talk about there then. One is that I think I see your point about the distinction between what I might have been hearing from them and how they govern and the choices they make, and definitely their political office. There was a story, I think, in the Times this morning, it might have been the Washington Post, about Patrick Gaspard, who's the director of political operations, technically the position that Rove had, I think, in the Bush White House. It does not look good for him. The stand that they chose to make in terms of leading the party and finding new candidates and deepening their bench in elected officials, I mean, clearly has not worked out very well. And that's partly due to the flavor of the times. That's partly due to the choices that they made. And they made the choices based on what they thought, the future was going to hold for them. So I see your point there. And I also think that a distinction I might make is the people... I talked to sort of two different... I'm sure that you have the same kind of distinction in your reporting life, which is that there are the people in government who talk to reporters all the time, and that's what their job is to talk to reporters.
Okay.
And people whose job is to not talk to reporters and who you talk to not as often and maybe for not as long, but usually you get a very different picture from them. And I would very much draw a distinction between what I saw coming out of the communications office, and that I think that when conservatives talk about hubris in the Obama White House, I mean, I think they definitely are talking about, and they have every right to, talking about the public statements that are made, because that's the face that the Obama White House chose to put forward. No matter what I was hearing from people a little bit more behind the scenes, what they chose to put forward was this kind of arrogance, really, that a lot of people are reacting badly to right now. Not just people on the right, but independents as well. And I don't know how much of a shellacking the Democrats are going to get on Tuesday, but I definitely feel like that arrogance is a puzzle piece in what has gone wrong for the Democrats going into midterms.
Yeah, but I think it really comes from the top. I mean, is the president who decided to have an $800 billion stimulus. Is the president who decided to go ahead on health care. And a lot of these, I don't know a lot about that political director or really anything, but the other high-profile aides, people like Rahm Emanuel and Christina Romer and Larry Summers, no one, when they started in this administration, no one said, here are fire-breathing, ideological purists who are going to push the system to the max to jam through as much, enormously complicated, poorly understood legislation in as reckless a manner as possible. But that's exactly what they did, because that's what their orders were to do, and that's what the president wanted to do. So the arrogance really, to me, goes right to the top.
You can call it poorly understood. I'm not sure whose fault that is. I don't necessarily blame Christina Romer for that legislation not being very well understood by like an average American or an average elected official. And I don't think of them as particularly fire breathing. I do think this is a question where I think their policies were not nearly as progressive as I think. For instance, I would want them to be, but definitely the way that they were presented and the way they put them forward and the way they tried to move them forward does, lend credence to what you're talking about. As more of a fire-breathing progressive, I guess I am so hesitant to think of the White House that way. But I see how it is interpreted that way. And definitely, that's something that's going to turn the base out when it comes to Tuesday. I'm not sure if an average American or a swing voter thinks of the Obama White House as being as being something so far to the left that that's what they're afraid of. I think your average swing voter and your average voter in general probably is disturbed by the economic crisis, disturbed by the lack of progress, as opposed to progressivism. But I'm not sure if it's really ideological. I mean, if you look at some of the polling, they're dissatisfied with both parties. And they don't trust either party, and they don't see the solutions as being ideological either. I mean, you definitely see that the excitement on the right, the base on the right, comes from a very ideological standpoint. But I'm not sure if that's something that captures the entirety of the electorate's mood. But I could be wrong. We'll see what happens on Tuesday and see what the exit polls look like on Tuesday.
Yeah, well, it seems as though the independents, their views on these tax and spending and debt and healthcare pretty closely tracks that of Republicans, not entirely.
But their solutions to them aren't ideal. I say that you're right about their feelings about those things, but the solutions that they want for those problems, I think, are not the same. And in fact, I'm not sure they know what the solutions they really want are.
I think mostly they want to tap the brakes on what's been happening.
True, but even then, if you ask, but it's, what do you cut? I mean, I think that's a question that even people who know what they're talking about have trouble answering. I think even Paul Ryan has trouble, making a case that he could live with, going forward as a leader in the GOP. I mean, it's easy to speculate about the kinds of things that you can cut. But I think even Paul Ryan has said you can't do it through cutting alone. We're not, this deficit problem, the Deficit Commission is set to deliver, their recommendations, or supposed to deliver recommendations, during the lame duck Congress. And it's looking like they're not even going to be able to have a full set of recommendations that are approved by, I think, how many people are on? Maybe it's 18 people on the.
That sounds right. That sounds right.
And there's, in order to get consensus and have, I don't know. It's not that they have any legislative power, but supposedly I think 12 people out of 8 have to vote for something for it to be considered going forward, and it's looking like they're not even going to be able to get that together.
Yeah, I think the whole thing will be a fizzle.
Yeah.
And Ryan's point is that you can't do it by just cutting alone. You need a growing economy. So right. he would argue that you need to control the growth of government, so you inevitably don't have growth suppressing tax increases, and then you have hopefully can institute some sort of more rational pro-growth tax system. But I think what we'll see is if Republicans take the House, they'll have a bill to repeal health care within the first couple of weeks. It'll pass the House, it'll get bogged down and die in the Senate. Even if it didn't, President Obama would veto it. You'll see a budget that I will imagine, I'd be very shocked if it weren't a very serious effort, at least on that slice of the budget that's the domestic discretionary, which is
pretty small.
About 1/8 of the budget, yeah. But in terms of
won't make much of a difference, but it'll make for a lot of good posturing. That's for sure, and definitely you'll see conservative Republicans, new House conservative Republicans, making a big deal about that. I think it's what's going to be interesting to see if the economy responds and if it makes a difference in the lives of people, that they can see. Because one of the problems that the Obama administration has right now, and one of the reasons voters are so angry, is that solutions to what we're going through right now are incredibly slow. Conservative solutions to what we're going through right now are slow. There is no quick fix to any of this.
I was going to say on the budget, in terms of just the history, if you look at the growth of the federal budget, to do a substantial reduction of domestic discretionary, even though it's just a slice, that's an extraordinary, practically unprecedented thing. I think in the mid-'90s, the Gingrich Congress, they did get the growth into negative territory maybe for a year or two. You look at Reagan, I think. Well,
are you talking about actually making? I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, they'll. I mean, that's not the budget that will go through.
Right. So they'll have a pretty austere budget in the House, and that will either die in the Senate, or President Obama won't sign that either.
Right.
So we'll end up basically with gridlock, and then we're basically, in my view, all of this is a big play for 2013. Either President Obama's reelected, gets to consolidate everything, and even push more progressive priorities in that golden year after he's reelected, or Republicans have unified control of the government and can really institute their version of change. But we're probably just going to have as someone I think has already put it, trench warfare over the next 2 years, and no one's going to have a decisive advantage.
I think that's probably true, and of course, conventional wisdom is that's the way that people like it. I mean, we'll see. I'm not sure. I do think this is something it's sort of a fuzzier thing to talk about, but I do think something about politics has really changed in the past 3 or 4 years, and I'm not sure how people are going to react to trench warfare and to things even more bogged down than they already are.
But see, this is one thing that really drives me crazy, though. The idea that things are bogged down. I mean, you had $800 billion of new deficit spending, within weeks of Obama taking office. You had a 2,000-page healthcare bill, an historic accomplishment for progressives in this country. You had a 2,000-page. Now I think the phrase for it is Wall Street reform. These are major pieces of legislation. So, yes, Republicans were saying no, they were opposing it, but they are a rump minority, and they weren't able to stop it. So Washington is not broken in that sense. I mean, Obama got as much as could reasonably be expected. What makes, I think, people on the left in the Obama administration complain about Washington being broken is it's not more popular. If his approval rating were 10 points higher, or this legislation, if they could still use the word stimulus and not get laughed out of the room, if they could campaign on health care reform, everything would be peachy and wonderful about Washington and our political process. The fact that this stuff got passed and has gotten rejected by the public.
Well, it's not the Obama administration. It's not just the Obama administration that's talking about Washington being broken. Number one, I mean, I think the Daily Show last night had a great series of clips, a montage of Republicans talking about things being broken and using the phrase "Washington is broken" a lot. And also, I have to reject your idea of referring, counting how big a piece of legislation is by how many pages it is, or what the page count is, because that's not, I think, a way to measure.
That's fine, but healthcare and
all those things that you talked about had huge stamps of Republicans had a huge stamp on all of those things, and they were not the kind of huge generational changes, with the exception
healthcare and financial reform were not huge.
Well, they're huge
pieces of legislation. Even if you reject the page count, these are enormous accomplishments. I mean, to create an enormous $1 trillion new entitlement program on healthcare that supposedly will insure 35 million. That's a huge deal, and
it's not as big as we wanted.
You're right. I know, but this is why I think folks on your side sort of say, "Oh, he's a centrist because he didn't do everything Paul Krugman wanted." But that's not the definition of the center in this country. And yes, Republicans say Washington is broken. Everyone loves running against Washington. They say it's broken in the sense it's passing a bunch of legislation that doesn't work and threatens our future. But I mean, you had large Democrats majorities in the House and the Senate, and they passed legislation the president wanted, 3 really big deal pieces of legislation. And the problem here is not that he didn't get what he wanted. The problem is he got what he wanted, but what the public doesn't want.
I'm not sure if the public knows what it wants or not. I mean, I think we're still seeing the rollout of healthcare. We're still seeing the fallout from financial reform. And I think that there are pieces of financial reform that definitely did not change the underlying structure of a system that is really in trouble. But I want to move on.
Okay.
Enough of this actual discussion of policy. I want to talk to you about women, because that is something that, of course, I as a woman have some interest in. And that there's been sort of a lot of discussion about it because there's a lot of female Republicans running, obviously. And there's supposedly a gender gap actually turning in the Republicans' favor going into midterms. And is that something that you're seeing or that you feel is happening?
I don't think that's the case. I haven't seen that. I think Sharon Angle is up 10 among men and down 10 among women, sort of the traditional gender gap.
Yeah.
Linda McMahon, sort of a special case, but she's getting killed, as I understand it, among women. And she's a special case because she ran a business that, would have shows of women, scantily clad women crawling on all fours.
Is that supposed to make her more, or is that supposed to make her more or less popular with women?
Less, I would think, and hope, and obviously.
Or at least tremendously more popular with men than she is with women.
So I think the gender gap is still there. It's more complicated than people talk about because the women's vote obviously isn't a monolith. Women don't vote for women candidates disproportionately. I don't think they vote on quote-unquote women's issues. They vote on what everyone else votes on. And you see the same split among marrieds and singles among women than you do on the broader electorate. I think Gallup, they occasionally do these demographic breakdowns. And among married voters, Obama was in the 30s. So it's single women who are really when we talk about the women's vote, who are really the kind of the molten core of the Democratic constituency there.
Yeah, and I mean, this maybe we're not going to get talking this as much as I thought we would, because I tend to agree with most of what you're saying, and I also think that there was just a flurry of gender gap stories about a week ago. I think talking about the Obama or Democrats in the Obama administration's supposed problem with women, and I think that boils down to the fact that women are economic voters. I mean, as much as anyone else is,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually women are harder hit in economic times, and they're going to react badly to those times as well. I mean, I could argue individually about what the policies that they may have problems with, whether or not those are actually bad for women. But, in tough times, women suffer, and they're going to, react the same way that any other voter does, and they're going to reject whoever's in power. And so I guess we agree.
Yeah, it's also true of Latinos, too. Shockingly, when you look at the polls and what they actually vote on, it's not immigration for all the hue and cry. It's the economy, and that's just the bottom line issue for pretty much everyone.
It's only middle class and above. If you're secure in what's going on. I mean, this is a truism that we've seen over and over. I mean, it's only social issues only come into play if you already, if you know you're going to have food on the table. Which I don't have a good segue to the next thing we're supposed to talk about.
What is the next thing we're supposed to talk about? Is it the Jon Stewart rally?
Yeah.
I can't say I have much to say about
this.
Actually,
you know what I can say? Here's a segue, which is that the kinds of people that are going to show up at this rally are probably the kinds of people that don't worry about having food.
Well, exactly. And, we're sort of pleased with the whole thing at a certain level as, many conservatives, as many liberals as can be siphoned down to Washington for, an irony-soaked rally mocking the American public and politics, the better. I hope Ariana has many, many busloads of her people heading down there instead of going to congressional districts and actually helping elect liberals. So I hope there's a big crowd down there.
Well, I actually was lucky enough to talk to some of the Daily Show guys yesterday and talk to them about what they think is happening and the perception. And I walked away with two impressions. One is I tend to agree with their assertion that they're not going to be siphoning off poll workers, or GOTV workers. If we want to make broad generalizations about the kind of people that are huge Jon Stewart fans and that would come to DC to see Stewart or see Colbert, I don't think those are people that are going to be out that would in any other situation be out knocking on doors. That's maybe a wrong assumption, and I do think there is some activism and definitely activists are Jon Stewart fans. A lot of liberal activists that I know are huge Stewart fans, but I don't think that they're necessarily the same group of people. The people that were going to planning on GOTV are not going to scrap their GOTV plans and go to this rally. I mean,
yeah. Well, if there's even one young liberal who's going down there instead of going to a congressional district, it's all all good as far as.
All right, so hey, Young Liberal, if you're watching, Young Liberal on GOTV, if you're watching this, don't go to the Stewart rally. Go to GOTV, please. The other thing I want to say about it is that I was, I've been a rally and protest goer for a long time, or was for a long time, until, of course, I soured on the entire business and decided to be a cynic professionally. But one thing that I wonder about this rally is that, and this is true, I think, of no matter what ideology is being represented, people who go to rallies and protests tend to think of going there and the act of being there as being the point. Like, they're not there to be entertained. They're not there, to tell something to someone specific. There's a show of force.
Right.
And
just their very presence is a kind of vote for whatever that cause. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you go to a Tea Party, and I've been to a bunch of Tea Party rallies. I've been to a bunch of, reported on and been to a bunch of liberal rallies. I mean, people are just happy to be there. Like, oftentimes, 99 times out of 10, you can't hear the speaker. You're not really there for the speaker. You're just there to be among people who think like you do, and to sell, and your very presence is a kind of voice. With something like these rallies, whose very dual titles, conflict with each other and show that they don't necessarily stand for anything. Like, the two titles cancel each other out, so you're left with nothing. What are these people, like, what... I have to believe that they're going there to be entertained. Like, this is more of a concert than a rally or a march. And I wonder, on that level, I know that they both are great entertainers and can put on a good show, but I don't know what it means. And I'm not sure if it means much at all, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a disadvantage because I'm not a student of either of these guys in particular. I've only done Colbert once. He is an incredibly quick wit. I mean,
and super nice guy. I always have to say,
a very nice guy, and arguably the quickest wit on TV on any platform. Really incredibly bright. But I mean, aren't they selling a certain ironic, sensibility? Yeah,
and I guess. I wonder. Well, this brings to this. It's funny. Like, I'm in the Colbert and Stewart sort of age cohort, maybe like a little bit younger. But I went through the '90s, and it being ironic about stuff. Gen X, and then realizing that irony was actually a really terrible political statement. And I still think it's a terrible political statement. And I think Stewart and Colbert, both to their credit, I think when you scratch the surface, and you don't have to scratch it very deeply, are actually pretty earnest about their politics. That makes for not very good comedy, which is why that's not something that they do, as performers. But again, I guess I just keep coming back to, like, irony as a political statement is no politics at all, and if anything, it's disengagement.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you, and I would much prefer, just as a citizen, if there are a bunch of young, well-educated liberals out there, that they're going to hear the equivalent of Adlai Stevenson, whoever he is today, some super earnest nerd, rather than this irony, which I think comes, whatever Stewart and Colbert's intentions are, with a certain built-in superiority that I find very distasteful.
Definitely. I mean, I don't know if I find it distasteful, but I see that it can definitely strike people that way. And again, I want to say that I think the people who are involved with these shows and these performers personally, I don't think of themselves as very superior, and I don't think that's their intent. But this rally in and of itself, to me, seems kind of frivolous.
Right.
I agree with you. To talk about, these are people that don't have to worry about putting food on the table. These are people that are going to show up not because they're impassioned about change, even, but, because they're really big fans of the show, which is great. I'm more power to them, and they deserve all the Emmys that they have. But I don't know. I'll be going, I should say. And
well,
also
I hope you write about it. Sounds very interesting.
I'm hoping to write about it.
And I'd rather have you there than covering a campaign.
Well, I wasn't going to go do GOTV anyway, so I think that's it. But anyway, if you're watching this and you're planning on doing GOTV, do that and don't go to the rally. Listen, watch my Twitter feed. I will cover it for you while you're out there doing, getting votes. So anyway, well, and also it'll depend on. I mean, talk about something. Your sunny day Patriots or rainy day Patriots. It'll be really interesting to see what the kind of turnout. This is more than any other rally I can think of. This is one that's going to have a lot to do with the weather.
Is it? What's the weather forecast?
I think it's supposed to be nice.
Okay.
So in which case it'll be huge and it'll be lovely, and I'm sure I will like a lot of the people that I meet, and I bet we have a lot of bands in common.
Good.
But,
More power to you.
But also, we don't know what the rally, actual content of the rally is going to be. And I feel like I should add that both Stewart and Colbert have occasionally stepped back from their ironic personas and delivered really compelling monologues. I'm sure you've seen or at least heard of Stewart's post 9/11 monologue, which was very, very well done and heartfelt and beautiful in its own way. And I think that Colbert has done so much to support the military and support the troops that that in of itself is something that is hard not to be moved by. So they're both capable of sentiment. It just is going to be interesting to see what the combination of sentiment and irony they bring to the table on Saturday.
And you'll be tweeting it. I'll be following.
Yes. Okay. Anything else to add, Rich?
I think we've covered everything.
Do you want to give a number?
We were going to talk about. What's that?
Yeah. Do you want to give your
a
numbers?
Number? I say sure. I say based on very little race by race, in fact, perhaps none analysis. That I'd say 60 or above in the House, just based on going a little higher than conventional wisdom. I think conventional wisdom is about mid-50s now.
Yeah.
And the people I trust who are race watchers are high 50s. So I'll just tweak that up a little bit. I've said for about a year, I believe, that Republicans are going to take the Senate, so I have to stick by that after all this time, although it's really looking like threading the needle at this point.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. They'll have to sweep the table in competitive races and win California or Washington. And I think California is looking pretty dicey.
California's looking dicey.
Yeah,
and,
which is it shouldn't have ever looked like it was a challenge. So the fact that it's dicey is in of itself kind of a bad thing. But okay, I'm going to make my prediction, and maybe we'll have to do a blogging heads next week to discuss what went wrong. Because one of us is going to be wrong. I'm going to say that the Democrats keep the Senate, just barely. And I think that it's going to be in the low 50s, so maybe I'll just say 50 in the House.
Okay.
Republicans.
50 is still a big.
And what about governors? Do you have
number.
a governor? Do you have a governor?
I don't have a governor
prediction?
number. I don't have.
I think it's going to be a good night for a Republican.
Yeah, I think Larry Sabato's at 8, so somewhere around there.
Pick up of 8 for so that'd be 20, 25. Wait, what would that be?
I don't know. This is very brave trying to add this up on camera, Anna.
I know, it is. I'm not going to do it. It's going to be a good night. Haley Barbour is going to have a very good night.
Yeah, and then we'll see. I mean, he everyone around him that I've talked to says he'll if he has a really good night and he's clearly the RGA has overperformed, that he's going to think very seriously about running for president. And,
yeah, that's what I...
And that guy, I mean, he's a human ATM machine in terms of how much money he can raise. It's just amazing.
He is very well positioned, as they say. I think he is obviously not a dark horse, since people are talking about it. But he, to me, makes more sense than Mitt Romney in a lot of ways for 2012.
Yeah, so. He's a tremendously capable guy. It's just that, he looks and sounds, and in some respect, his resume reflects, a stereotype.
Yeah,
which
he's a good
very
old boy.
Hard to shake, yeah.
He's a good old boy with lots of connections to lobbyists, but, that may turn out to be not such a bad thing. I mean, as you said, that's one of the reasons he's a human ATM machine. All right, Rich, I think we've covered everything. I want to thank you as well.
I enjoyed the rally. Say hi to everyone for me. Say hi to all those would-be election volunteers.
All right.
Take care.
I'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.